hereby I open this academic ceremony at Maastricht University. My name is Ton de Goey. I am the pro-rector of this ceremony and chair of the degree committee. First of all, I welcome Mr. Joey Nicholson. He will defend his thesis in public, and the title of the thesis is Partnering for Success, Librarian Involvement in Assessment for Learning. Welcome all members of the degree committee, in particular the three supervisors. And from left to right, it's Professor Annick de Bruin. She is Professor of Self-Regulation in Higher Education at Maastricht University. Professor Dr. Kees van der Vleuten, he is Professor of Education Science, in particular in Medicine. And the co-supervisor is Dr. Adina Khaled, and she is Professor of Medicine at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I will introduce the 6 opponents later during the ceremony. And I would like to welcome all the audience here in the aula, and of course all followers of the live stream. May I ask you, Mr. Nicholson, to give a summary of your thesis, and I wish you success in the coming hour. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Dear Pro-Rector, dear members of the committee, dear colleagues, friends, family here in the room and at home online, I hope you'll also excuse my raspy voice. It just adds a little character. In the next 15 minutes, I'll give you an overview about the research I've conducted over the last several years. So picture it. You just graduated medical school. You're on one of your first nights where you're the primary person responsible for patient care. You see a patient and you figured out they have urgent hypertension. Before moving forward with the treatment plan, do you A, Google it, B, look up antihypertensive drugs on Wikipedia, or C, call your attending? Or for those of us that aren't clinicians, do you want your doctor to be more proficient in using sources beyond Google? Or do you think Google's good enough because their algorithm promotes popular results? For me, I think I would like them to be able to go a little bit further. And I think with a simple clinical question, a resident or a senior medical student should know how to find evidence to support their plan, and they should be able to go beyond Google and into information resources based on scientific evidence. So this process is taught as a part of medical education via the concept of evidence-based medicine, otherwise known as EBM. Evolving from the original definition in the late 1900s, EBM is the intersection of clinical expertise, patient values and preferences, and the best scientific evidence. EBM is a method that works to try to ensure informed decision-making in healthcare. In EBM, practitioners follow a systematic approach that's encapsulated in 5 key steps: ask, acquire, appraise, apply, and assess. And following these steps can help guide clinical decision-making, help confirm suspicions, contribute to increased efficiency in healthcare delivery, and ultimately what we're looking for is improved patient outcomes. So these are the steps that are being taught frequently by librarians, but how do we know that learners can actually do all of these steps and do them well? And how are our medical students being assessed at them? Are we doing the most effective assessment in order to help them learn and perform this process better? Long before EBM was solidified as a key concept in medicine, librarians have been teaching those skills. And to this day, librarians are still some of the main teachers of that content. Librarians are not just repositories of information, but we're active contributors to the education and evaluation of future healthcare professionals. So as medical education assessment practices continue to evolve, there's also a need for medical librarians like myself to update our own assessment practices and keep pace. And so this need in my own work and in my professional community brought me to my overarching research question. How is evidence-based medicine competency assessment implemented by librarians and experienced by medical students? And ultimately, how can we improve it? So I answered this question through examining 3 key areas over a series of 4 studies. First, I wanted to know, what are the methods that medical students were using to search for, acquire, and integrate evidence? What are their observable information-seeking behaviors? Second, I needed to know the landscape of teaching and assessing EBM in medical libraries and how librarians felt about assessment. And third, I wanted to better understand student perspectives on observational EBM assessment. So let's start out with information-seeking behaviors. What are the observable information-seeking behaviors of senior medical students when performing an EBM activity? So to do this study, we did an analysis of screen recordings of graduating medical students responding to an EBM prompt and searching for information. In order to do this analysis, I needed to use a theoretical framework to better understand and be able to describe searching behaviors. That's where optimal foraging theory comes into play. Originating from ecology, this theory was originally used to help describe foraging behaviors in the wild. How does the squirrel know which tree to go to for food? How much food do they get at that tree? When do they know when to switch to the next tree? How much food do they get there? What is that foraging process for them? And this began to be applied to information sciences in the 90s, in the early days of when the public was searching the internet. And so it's used to understand strategies for information seeking with a specific lens of effectiveness and efficiency. So we want people to be able to get the most accurate and valid information that they can with the least amount of effort. And while optimal foraging theory has already been used to implement some training for EBM, it thus far has not been used to create behavior-based rubrics to assess and provide feedback on learner ability. So I think this theory is a good fit for clinical information seeking because of the emphasis on maximum retrieval with minimal effort. In this time-sensitive and high-pressure context, it's important to keep effectiveness, or getting the right answer, and efficiency, getting the right answer quickly, in mind. But then we had to figure out if we could and how to operationalize this into an assessment. So in this study, we took screen recordings of students at an EBM station as part of an observed structured clinical exam, an OSCE. They'd seen a standardized patient, and when they left the room, they were given a clinical question prompt with only 10 minutes to answer in order to better simulate their clinical time crunch. They were given no specific guidance as to how or what kinds of resources to use to answer, and just a box on the screen to type in how they would proceed with treatment based on the evidence that they found. We then used optimal foraging theory when analyzing all the behaviors performed in the videos to try to describe and classify their search patterns. So we looked at where students began a search for information, how long they spent in a resource, how they used that database, whether or not they were successful in finding an answer there, and then whether or not they went on to another source and collected the same data. On average, students spent 6 minutes and 35 seconds completing this activity. And from it, 4 main patterns emerged. As you can see here, the majority of students are using a point-of-care tool alone when doing information seeking, 43% of students. So a point-of-care tool is going to be something like UpToDate, designed to be used at the bedside. 21% used 2 resources, a point-of-care tool and PubMed. Another 19% used a point-of-care tool and some other scholarly resource like Google Scholar or Web of Science. And the remaining 17% used a combination of other scholarly or non-scholarly databases. So some key takeaways from this were that optimal foraging theory did work. It was able to provide a framework that we could leverage to better describe the observed and expected behaviors. So using that, we were able to describe and extract the steps that students followed within 4 main patterns. And also importantly, medical students were able to do this activity within 10 minutes. The time was not an issue. However, medical students do have room for improving this skill. We definitely saw some weaknesses. Coming out of this research, we developed a rubric on EBM behaviors and integrated that into an OSCE. So the rubric categories seen here reflect what we were able to observe in the screen recordings across the first 3 steps of EBM: ask, acquire, and appraise. And you'll note that there are 3 categories for acquire, and this reflects the depth of the information seeking this process that's captured on screen. On each of these steps, medical students are rated on a scale of well done, partly done, or not done, and each level will include a description of the specific behaviors we would expect to see on screen. And so that's going to help ensure that both the raters and the learners have similar expectations for how things should be done. This was then integrated into the Night on Call OSCE. This OSCE is a multiple-hour, multi-station, high-fidelity, immersive simulation. In it, a health sciences librarian observes and rates a medical student's EBM behaviors. The EBM station is only 10 minutes out of this entire OSCE, and it assesses only this one area of key clinical skills that a resident might be expected to perform alone on a night on call. So this OSCE format emphasizes the practical application of EBM within the clinical context. This approach not only assesses their theoretical knowledge, but evaluates how effectively that knowledge is translated into real-world medical scenarios, providing us a more comprehensive understanding of the student's capabilities. So we think this OSCE provides an exciting opportunity for medical librarians today, but what do they think about it? So let's go back to the librarians and think about their institutional contexts and needs. And to get at this, I did 2 studies. The first study is a survey of medical libraries that explored the question, what's the level of engagement of health sciences librarians in teaching and assessing EBM? And the second study included focus groups digging deeper into the question, what are the needs and preferences of librarians when assessing these behaviors in medical students? So in the survey, with 53% of academic medical libraries responding, we found that almost all are involved to some degree in both teaching and assessment of the steps of EBM. However, assessment lags behind teaching. Particularly in the first 3 steps, there's quite a high level of involvement in teaching of EBM and much lower involvement in assessment of EBM. In the same survey, we also asked for participants to rank their most significant barriers. And the most significant barriers were reported to be lack of time in the curriculum, lack of staffing, and lack of useful or scalable models from other libraries. So this brought a question for me to ponder: how might providing an EBM OSCE as a model help address some of these challenges? So with these findings, we needed to dig a little bit more into assessment practices. And because we also wanted to know what librarians thought about the potential of Night on Call, we first recruited some to participate in a live round of assessing medical students via the Night on Call format, and with that developed rubric. Then, following their experience assessing students in Night on Call, we held focus groups to discuss overall EBM assessment practices, all of our own institutional contexts, and the potential impact or the utility of this OSCE. Some significant barriers were surfaced. Medical school administrators could do more by better recognizing the work of librarians, formally including librarians in assessment meetings and curricular processes, and supporting appropriate levels of staffing to be able to do this kind of activity. However, often administrators are not aware of student skills in EBM or lack thereof, nor are administrators always truly aware of the work that librarians are doing or could be doing on this front, and so they don't tend to prioritize this. Many of our librarians had experiences similar to what we see in this quote. The whole library has been cut out of the curriculum because students don't need it, students are smart, they know how to find information. No, they really don't, and leaders of the curriculum are often unaware of students' actual skill levels. But it's not all doom and gloom. Many librarians are effective in their ability to do assessment, and those that felt most effective in assessing EBM were when they were explicitly given space in the curriculum and partnered with an engaged physician faculty member. These librarians all liked the idea of an EBM OSCE and this proposed format and rubric, but without more administrative support from their schools, it would be difficult to implement something like this at scale. However, even testing it out at a school could create more of these opportunities by raising awareness, as we heard from one of our other librarians. One of the coordinators saw the students searching on Night on Call and was like, oh boy, they're not doing this well at all. So her seeing that really opened her eyes, and that helped bring us into the curriculum faster than I've ever gotten invited. So some takeaways from that are that librarians are indeed underutilized in assessing EBM. And unfortunately, librarians often don't feel supported by their administration or respected for their work on these efforts. And related, librarians often feel like they don't have enough power or prestige to take on this role without that strong administrative support. Ultimately, librarians are looking for smarter, better, more integrated ways of assessing medical student learning, and this EBM OSCE could be used to help address some of these issues that are faced. So let's think about the medical student perspective as well. How do graduating medical students feel about being assessed on EBM behaviors via observation? To answer this, we did individual interviews with graduating medical students who had participated in Night on Call. We found that students both appreciated and were surprised by an EBM OSCE. It was a realization to them that EBM is indeed a skill that they will need clinically in order to succeed. So this awareness was raised of their own skill level as well, and the experience made the students reconsider their own ability to perform this activity, mostly by pointing out that they really weren't as good as they had thought and could improve, such as reflected in this quote from a student. My takeaway was they still have not mastered that skill. Keep in mind, this is a graduating medical student. I could definitely get better at quickly finding those answers, or I guess finding them at all because I didn't really find a great answer. So I guess I probably need both more practice and more instruction in the PubMed part. The students also had a lot of suggestions for making this a more effective tool for their own learning. The biggest request was that they have EBM OSCEs earlier and more frequently in the curriculum to give them time to build their own self-confidence and skill, but also that they receive actionable feedback throughout so that they can use to improve for the next time. By being able to practice EBM in a simulation with other clinical skills, this really helped reinforce to the students that this would be an important thing to improve and would be necessary for practice. And this idea was shared by many students in quotes like this one. I actually think it probably could have been helpful to have this before clerkship year and have gotten feedback and then had the chance to get reassessed after clerkships to see if we've been able to incorporate some of that feedback. So some key takeaways here are that despite what they're taught early on in their careers, graduating medical students don't understand the role, the importance, or their own skill and application of EBM in clinical practice. Having an integrated assessment of these skills was a really appreciated opportunity for feedback and learning that they'd like to see more of to be able to practice and improve over time. Much like with the librarians, we found that this EBM OSCE has the potential to help address these issues for students. So in the course of this research, we've used optimal foraging theory to observe and classify behaviors in order to create a rubric for assessment via night on call. We explored the needs and pressures on librarians in medical education, who pointed out that their need for awareness, respect, and inclusion. And finally, we spoke to medical students, our learners, to better understand how this could help them learn EBM better through more opportunities for practice, actionable feedback, and integration with their other assessment methods. Ultimately, this dissertation highlights an innovative tool offering a practical solution to address pressures librarians are facing, raise awareness among administrators and students of student skill levels, and then address the gaps in assessing the EBM skills of medical students. And finally, I would say this isn't something that librarians can do alone. It's something that I think interprofessional communities have to be able to come together to be able to support this kind of work. So thank you very much, and I give the floor back to the pro-rector.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson, for your clear presentation and a good view on summary of your thesis. The opposition will be opened by the chair of the Thesis Assessment Committee, Professor Erik Driessen. He is Professor of Medical Education at Maastricht University. Professor Driessen.
Dear Mr. Nicholson, dear candidate, thank you for doing this important work. I've read with much pleasure and attention your thesis. I think it's important work. I think probably the librarians are the most underestimated professional group within medicine and medical education. I have to look that I work on a daily basis with somebody with an information sciences background. So my compliments to you for your hard work and your good work. Also compliments to your international supervisory team, and who are all here, which is special. However, I'm here to discuss with you, and I also read your CV. So my first question is, do you know the musical The Sound of Music?
Yes.
Good. That makes my first question easier. So in The Sound of Music, Maria, a nun, enters the Van Trapp family, a match made in heaven. Beautiful things happen, but then the political climate changes in the country, and they have to cross the Alps to flee the country. Correct summary?
Yeah.
Now, it reminds me of evidence-based medicine. You, in 1992, evidence-based medicine entered medicine and medical education. It was a match made in heaven. It was like Maria with the Van Trapps. So we all embraced it, we found it important. But then the political climate changed in the world. Now it's debated, evidence-based medicine. Who decides what's truth? Who decides what's evidence? Is there one evidence? Is there one truth? So we're part of this change in the world. So I wondered, has your thinking about evidence-based medicine changed since you started with your PhD works? And what's your own personal stance on evidence-based medicine?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. I have a deeply personal feeling about evidence-based medicine. I mean, My mother, who's here in the audience, is a medical librarian, or was before she retired. So I learned very early on about evidence-based medicine and have thought for, since I was 11 or 12, like, oh, this is really important to understand where you're getting your information from and being able to interpret it. So I think that I would say that my personal opinions on it haven't changed. I can understand people's debates about it and the people who say things like, oh, this is textbook medicine. And I think they're having such a strict literal interpretation of EBM, of like, oh, you find an answer and then that's what you do. I think EBM should be interpreted a little bit more loosely than that. You should be able to find evidence, understand where it's coming from, synthesize it, and incorporate it with what you already know in the patient. And I don't think, from my point of view, that's not textbook medicine or cookbook medicine. That's really understanding your sources. And I think as we move forward with AI, especially generative AI, it makes things up. That is the whole point of it. How are we going to understand what to do with that information unless we have a really strong foundation in looking at original sources, understanding how things are put together, and being able to fully assess and synthesize where you're getting your evidence from?
Okay, so your values haven't changed towards evidence-based medicine?
I would say my feelings have not changed.
No. But you have a very nuanced perspective on what evidence-based medicine is, and especially in these changes in time with artificial intelligence. Okay, that's nice. It's good to hear. So we'll leave the fun traps in the country. Okay, that's a good thing. Then the movie doesn't have to end. Let's move to chapter 4. You presented this. It's a qualitative study among your professional group, librarians. You did focus groups, and you discussed with them their ideas also about evidence-based medicine. But you also asked them about how they valued the OSCE station, the night shift station, and how enthusiastic they are to implement it in their own situation. But I could find less about those two questions in your results. But I thought I will see you now here in Maastricht. So this is my chance to hear from you personally, your participants. How did they value the OSCE station? And are they considering to implement a similar station or the exact same situation in their context?
That's a great question. Of course, there's only so much space to write anything in a journal article.
Yes. I'm very aware of that. I'm always fighting with authors on this topic. Yes. Yeah.
So I think, of course, with no group is a monolith, and opinions are mixed. Yeah. Especially from my colleagues my school is 100 medical students a year. So for us, that's a reasonable enough number to be able to assess in that method. For my other colleagues who have 400 or more medical students a year, then it becomes very difficult, because even if it's 10 minutes times 400, that's a lot of labor to be able to do. However, we do that for other clinical skills, so it would really require leadership to be able to support their involvement in assessment. So, opinions were mixed, because kind of what came out is like, yeah, this would be great. I don't have the time to do that. So it was like, for those people, it was could be a little bit shut down, because they couldn't even envision a place where they would work where, we'll never be given enough time or space or the room in the sim center to be able to do that. I think there are other ways we could move forward with doing this on a smaller scale, and it's something I'd like to look into in the future. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, first of all, you make me curious. What your future plans? What can you discover a little bit, just as a teaser?
So with the screen recording, with the technology we're using in Night on Call, we can theoretically deploy that at any point in time. So I think it would be easy enough to send it out to my medical students at the end of year 1 and have them do peer rating. I don't have to be involved in that. I can give them a scale.
Okay.
Then before clerkship year, can do the same thing. It doesn't always have to be at a SIM center, and it doesn't always have to be integrated in this context.
Now let's use this answer as a cliffhanger for the next opponent. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Driessen. The next opponent is Professor Desiree Joosten den Brink. She is Professor of Learning and Assessment at Maastricht University. Professor Joosten den Brink, the floor is yours.
Dear candidate, also I enjoyed reading your dissertation and admire your enthusiasm for using the role of librarians in a more effective as well as an efficient way in education. Both for the purpose of training students and for the purpose of assessment. But I also have some questions. My first question concerns chapter 3. There you conclude that students show relatively effective navigation patterns and extract a highly written answer. Your quotes. I quote you. Students are able to identify effectively the most reliable sources, and most students minimize the time they spend on unhelpful resources and quickly moved to the next more fruitful sources in their quest for an answer. Everyone completes the task well within 10 minutes, you just said, about 6 minutes. So you interpret this as signs that they are very effective information seekers. And for me, I thought, well, this is a very nice fairy tale. We lived happily ever after. Everything is fine. However, that conclusion isn't correct because in chapter 4 you indicate several times that there is still room for improvement, and you also said it in your presentation. My question is therefore, given the lack of time, as well mentioned by yourself, the limited time of librarians have for guidance and assessment, what do you see as the most important improvement that is needed? And what are the main arguments in your research that determined that are you not satisfied with the results mentioned in chapter 3?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for that really thoughtful question. I do have a very hard time picking just one thing. So I'll think about it while I'm formulating this. So we have been doing this assessment in Night on Call for a number of years now. And so I think that the N of data across 6 medical schools, and this is a little bit of a preview of what I'll do next after this dissertation. We have about 1,500 medical students, and 10% of those medical students, so 150 graduating doctors, just Googled things and clicked on the first link, which is a drug company ad, and said, I would prescribe labetalol. I think that even just 10% of medical students not understanding that they're clicking on a literal ad from a drug company, that for me, that's enough that I'm like, they need to understand that even if their time is crunched, they can do this, they can use a real source. So the majority do okay, but I think that the part that concerns me is the ones who don't do okay could be starting to go off into really bad territory where there could actually be patient harm or waste.
I understand. 10% is a lot, so that's a great answer. Thank you. Further in chapter 3, you addressed then the students' information-seeking behaviors, and to assess this behavior, you have developed a rubric, and this rubric is quite analytic. The question must be precisely and accurately formulated. The search must have started in an authoritative way of a source, and students should find an answer using high-quality evidence from specific sources. To assess whether students have evidence-based medicine skills, I think information seeking is only part of it, and I missed the critical appraisal of the evidence for its usefulness for the specific case. I wonder how do you see that, and are you assessing the information seeking skill with the rubric or the evidence-based medicine skill? And should it, your title was Assessment for Learning. So I wondered, should it be better to invest time of the librarians in instructing students how they do the information seeking as assessment for learning and adopt a more holistic approach for the assessment of the outcome of the research? Are students able to find evidence-informed, correct answers that fits the case of in a short period of time? Please hear your answer.
Sure. So the rubric covers ask, acquire, and appraise, and the next step is apply. And the way I interpret your question, you're asking, well, like, they can find something, but where's the apply? How do we know that they're finding and doing things in the correct way? And I think, in our initial study, we did have some clinicians go through that answer. I think most librarians that I've talked to feel like it's not our place to assess the quality of that written answer, because we're not MDs and we don't know. The students write a wide variety of things, and so it's really hard for us, not having the clinical background, to understand that context. However, with the advancements in AI, I think that we're going to be able to analyze that much like we're able to analyze notes, open notes that are written in charts. And so I think we're going to be able to use AI based on the answers that the clinical answers that have already been written, and incorporate the apply section as the next step in the next go round of the evolution of this. So I think you're absolutely correct. It's really important, but I think in my mind, this is a small evolution, and we have to go to that next step.
And what do you think of using the rubric more in an informative way in the instruction time, and especially focus on the 10% of students who don't do the information seeking correctly?
No, I think that's absolutely important. And that's one of the reasons that it's written with that detail. Because I think when I look at other rubrics for assessment of evidence-based medicine, they say things like, use a database. What does that tell a student if they look at it? Like, okay, I used a database. I want them to know, like, what level of detail do you need to use the database in order to actually be proficient? It's not good enough to just open up PubMed. You need to open up PubMed. You need to put in relevant terms. You also need to know how to use the facets on the side, or the same thing with Google Scholar. You need to be able to understand, like, is it giving you relevance ranked results? Do you want to limit to the most recent 5 years? Do you want to limit to trials or meta-analyses if you're trying to find that? And some students are able to demonstrate this in their skill set. Others are really not. And maybe it's because they're unaware that they can do those things, and it's not that hard. There's little buttons you can just click to do these things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Joosten ten Brinke. The next opponent is participating online, Professor Shannon Jones. She is Director of Libraries of the Medical University of South Carolina. Professor Shannon Jones, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. I enjoyed reading your am I echoing? I'm sorry. I enjoyed reading your dissertation, and it took me back to 15 years ago when I was an instructional librarian, and it's like, where was all of this expertise then? But I want to ask you a question related to your chapter 4 and beyond, because again, as you mentioned that teaching of evidence-based medicine, and I'd add evidence-based practice skills are important for librarians who teach. And I want to hear your thoughts about how, what ideas you have about carrying the results of your study to the broader health sciences librarian community beyond just the journal dissemination and conference presentation. How are you going to help those other librarians who teach in the medical curriculum, but the ones who also teach in nursing and in dentistry and pharmacy, all of the other professions that could benefit from this? How have you thought about how you do that?
Esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. Yes, I have thought about that. Of course, the context of this thesis was focused only on medical students, but like yourself, I do think a little bit more broadly, because I know that I'm serving more than just a medical student population. There are so many health professions, and unfortunately, nurses have a lot less money. Nurses don't have the opportunity to employ a librarian full-time a lot of the time. Same thing for other health professions. And often we, our time in a medical school curriculum is often quite supported by accreditation requirements in the US. So we're able to make an argument when we need to. It's not always as clear in nursing or pharmacy or other health professions areas. Nonetheless, I do think in thinking about how to take this forward, for me, this was a proof of concept. Like, could we do something to actually assess their behaviors? And could this be something that we could use with the students to help them learn? And is this something that we could do even on a small scale with just ourselves, even if we didn't really fully have the support of administration? Would there be some kind of method that we could use and expand upon as a community? And so I think in thinking about screen recordings, it is something like this for me is a proof of concept. I think the reality of the way people do information seeking is that it's more often on their phone, on their hand. And so again, I think we're going to have to evolve and do things like ask students to record what they're doing on their screen and send that in. Like every course management system can accept video recordings at this point and give students a rubric to work with of like, we don't care what information source you use, you just need to use it well. Like, and here's our rubric, this is how we're going to grade it. So I do think there's an ability to do that down the road, but I did want to think about perfecting this more with the medical student context first, before getting into the muddy waters of like nursing questions, which are quite a bit more complicated for a variety of reasons.
Okay. And another thing was in thinking about the professional competencies that the Medical Library Association has out there. There's 6 of them. And the third one is related to instruction and instructional design. And that one says that the competency says a health information professional educates others in the skills of bioscience, clinical, and health information literacy. Have you thought about how what you've learned in your study could impact that professional competency so that it impacts librarians all who teach in the health sciences environment all just over the US and whoever else uses our competencies?
I definitely have, and I think for me, one shortfall in the way librarians discuss this is we focus so much on teaching and we don't focus enough on assessment. Even in our own professional competencies, I think we could do a better job of calling that out. I think we're doing so much, and even the librarians that are doing assessment maybe don't collect it in a way that's recognized by the medical educators as like a valid form of assessment, or it's not in a format that integrates with the existing data sets. And so I think that those guidelines should be a little bit more explicit around assessment. I really do think that for learners, assessment drives their learning. And if we do a better job of assessing in ways that they understand, that they recognize as part of their curriculum, they might start to do a little bit better of the learning of it.
Okay, and then just one final thing. I got intrigued when I was reading your chapter 4, again, just when the librarians participants mentioned that some of the institutional challenges that they face. And so as a leader in the profession, what types of supports or advocacy did your participants mention that they needed from the library director to try to clear a pathway so that they can do more of this work in the curriculum or get positioned in the curriculum in a way that is meaningful?
I mean, I think the two biggest things are staffing and explicit inclusion. So like with staffing, many of you may not know, librarians typically have many jobs. So we'll be teaching medical students one day, nursing students the next day, staffing a reference desk the next day, doing collection development the next day. And when your attention is scattered across these variety of activities, you don't have the time to do any one of them at your best level. You may do them all pretty well, but if you've got a very small staff, and like at my institution, there are 45 or 50,000 employees at NYU Langone Health, how am I supposed to support everyone to a great level? So I think staffing is a huge need, even in a smaller library. If you could have like 1 or 2 dedicated people who just do that and don't have a variety of other activities, it could go a long way. And then explicitly being included in the curriculum as well. I know for me, that's been one of the biggest benefits is our leadership has had an open door policy. Please come to meetings. Yes, you should be at this table, and that's not the case everywhere. And so I think I would ask library directors to be working with their deans to make that argument of like, our library should have a seat at the table when you're doing curriculum redesign and when you're thinking about assessment, because not only does it influence our collection development policies, but it influences how we're going to interact with your students. We may develop a different kind of research guide that's more directed towards your curriculum. There's a wide variety of reasons why we should be at those tables. And too often I think that we are left out because people say, it's outside of what they need to do. We just need them to come in this one day and teach the EBM class, and that's all we need. And I think that's super short-sighted.
Thank you. That was the questions I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jones. The next opponent is also participating online, Dr. Emily Vordel, and she is Associate Professor of School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State University. Dr.
Yes, dear candidate, excellent and important work. It was a pleasure reading your dissertation. So speaking of the sound of music, medical librarians, information-seeking behavior, these are a few of my favorite things. So my first question has to do about your chapter 3. I'd like to hear more about why was optimal foraging theory the best fit for your study and your population? So I'd be curious if there were other theories that you considered. For example, maybe like berry picking, which is kind of a similar theory. So just kind of curious on if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Esteemed opponent, excuse me. Esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. Yes, I think there are so many different kinds of information-seeking theories. It's really, really difficult to pick, thanks. It's really, really difficult to pick just one that is going to be the best and only fit. So I really don't think that there's an only fit in this situation. I think that you could make many adapt and make many work. For me, I did a literature search of clinical information seeking analyses from the last 20 or so years and just looked to see what theories those used. And by and large, at least in the major medical journals, there was not a lot of theoretical basis. They, by and large, just described things without thinking about the theories that it fit into, which I think is because they're not information scientists. They're like MDs. So their view on things is very different. But the ones that I did find were using information foraging theory. So there were a few studies that used it, and I liked the way that it focused on effectiveness and efficiency. And when thinking about clinical information seeking at the point of care, to me that seemed like the most important thing to focus on. I do think that if you give a medical student 5 hours or overnight to do something, that's a very different kind of thing. They have plenty of time, they can use a lot of sources, but if they're at the bedside and they have a limited amount of time, that's really the context that I'm more thinking about. And that's why I think effectiveness and efficiency are important in this scenario.
That makes sense. Next, I have a kind of an overarching question. You say on page 15 of your dissertation, through this thesis, I will be able to make the case that there is an assessment gap in medical school education for EBM that should be filled by medical librarians. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how do we get medical school faculty and administration to listen and learn from your research?
I think the best way is to see it. So I think for my medical school deans, the first time we did a round of this, I showed them a video. Here's a student who was great. And they're like, oh yeah, of course, our students are great. Here's a student who just used Google. And here's another one who used Bing but couldn't find an answer in Bing. And people do actually really crazy things when they're searching for information, and it's so different to see them do it. You know, the old school method of assessing this, the Fresno test, which is considered the gold standard, was developed 20 years ago. It was in 2003, and it is a long form essay where students are asked to like write out what their search strategy was. I mean, I've spent a decade grading these. What students write is incomprehensible. I can't even tell what they've done based on what they wrote. So for me personally, I'm so fed up with like trying to read these things that don't actually have any meaning. I can't tell if you're good at that. I need to be able to see what you're doing in order to give you effective feedback. And I think it's the same for medical school administrators. If they don't see it, they don't understand it in the same way. And I think that was the case for me. And through Night on Call as well, there's been one of the schools actually that when they saw their first year of medical students doing their searches in whatever way they happened to do them, they were kind of horrified, and they went out and they got a grant to improve their curriculum. So, you know, like they've totally revamped not only their curriculum, but also their assessment, because they just didn't know that students didn't have those skills. And so I think the proof is in the visual in this case.
Mm-hmm. And then I've got some questions about the intervention, the OSCE intervention specifically. So I just was curious about, and this is kind of a two-parter, what are your thoughts about why librarians have been more successful at getting integrated in assessment in preclinical years rather than clinical? And what is it about the OSCEs that seem to help make the importance of EBM clearer to medical students? You noted that they endorsed it would be well accepted. So I'm curious about that.
So in terms of the preclinical years, I think that not only medical students, but a lot of administrators think of EBM as a quote-unquote research activity that you do when you're researching things. So they think, oh, in the pre-clerkship years, you're studying, you're reading articles, you're doing research. So that's when we'll do this content. Also, you're in a classroom, which is sort of easier to schedule, and so we can just put you in these contexts. So I think for those reasons, it's easier for both librarians and administrators to be integrated in pre-clerkship years. And now I forgot the second part of your question. Could you repeat it?
Oh, yeah. What is it about OSCEs that seem to help make the importance of EBM clearer to medical students?
Okay. This also relates to the fact that we are integrated in our instruction and assessment in the pre-clerkship years. Medical students don't understand always that it's a skill. Like, we're not teaching you something so that you can do a deep dive all the time. Like, that's also important. This is very different. Like, we want you to be able to do this rapidly. We want you to be able to do it in clinic. We want you to be able to do it with short notice. And so I think that there's not necessarily attention there, but I think there's a lack of awareness that this skill, it goes across multiple scenarios in their clinical and research journeys.
And then my last question is like a shorter one, and it may be like one of those, the ship has sailed. I was just curious about the title towards the end. I might suggest putting in medical student somewhere. It's like librarian involvement in assessment for medical student learning. Because when I read the title, it almost sounds like primary school or like K through 12. So just wanted to put in a note when people are like reading through your dissertation, they know, oh, that's what your focus was.
You may give a short answer, please.
Sure, yeah, I agree. I definitely had only medical students in my head and completely forgot about that context. Great suggestion.
Yeah, no problem. Great work.
Thank you, Dr. Vordel. The next opponent is Dr. Renee Stalmeijer. She is Associate Professor at the Department of Educational Development and Research, and she is also affiliated with the School of Health Professions Education at Maastricht University. Dr. Stalmeijer.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidates, I join my colleagues here present in congratulating you and your team with your amazing work. Back in 2015, I personally got to experience your passion for this topic when you were teaching our master students in the MHB New York site curriculum. I don't think I've ever witnessed a session by a librarian in which students were that captivated. So you already passed with flying colors on your teaching skills, but I'm here today to assess you as a researcher. So unfortunately not a musical reference like some of my colleagues, but a movie reference. Dear candidate, you had me at hello. Otherwise put, you had me at the title, Partnering for Success. During the last couple of years, my research has focused on interprofessional education, teaching, and learning as one of the foundations needed to help foster competent healthcare professionals. And from that perspective, partnerships between professionals with various backgrounds are crucial for interprofessional education to succeed. And I would argue, and I think I heard you argue as well, that effective teaching and assessment on the topic of evidence-based medicine is also a type of interprofessional education. And it requires effective joining of competence and forces between clinicians, basic scientists, librarians to teach EBM. However, while reading your work, I felt myself thinking, say it with me, show me the money. Show me the money. Translation, I found little evidence of that actual partnership in your data and in your theoretical and conceptual reflections on the topic of teaching and assessing EBM. So, dear candidate, I would like you to take another chance to captivate me at hello and explain to me what you mean when you say partnership.
Esteemed opponent, thank you so much. And I do blame all of this on Renee for convincing me to join this PhD program and further my work by jumping into research. You're right, there's no evidence of partnership, and I think part of the problem is that partnership is so limited. Libraries and librarians are often so siloed off that there are just not that many effective partnerships. And I think that a good future study would be trying to locate those of us that do have effective collaborations and trying to look into what is it about those, how do those develop. Typically, from my experience, and this is anecdotal, is that it takes a really driven special clinician who just has a bond and is like, oh, like I get what this is and I get what you're trying to do, and then you can really mesh things together nicely. Same thing with nurses, same thing with others. Like, I have seen examples of that, but it's so personality driven that it's difficult to find and it's difficult to replicate. So I think that that's the kind of thing that would need further qualitative study to figure out, like, what is it about these people that make them effective at partnering with the library community on these efforts. So for me, it's an outstanding question.
Yeah. Now you're playing right into my hand. Thank you for that. Could I invite one of the paronyms to read proposition number 4?
Innovative tools like evidence-based medicine OSCEs are needed to overcome barriers and integrate librarians more deeply into the evidence-based medicine assessment process.
Thank you very much. I heard you talk just now in the defense in your presentation, I read it in your thesis, that these barriers that you see often have to do with the barriers that everyone mentions, time, money, resources. But I wonder whether, because you said that what we need is convincing clinicians that do this with passion and that demonstrate our worth, literally. So I'm wondering about feedback credibility of librarians and how medical students conceive of that. It's a notorious issue within interprofessional education, and the same feedback uttered by a physician versus a nurse would be valued differently by medical students. And I imagine that's the case here as well. What would you suggest that could help address that feedback credibility by librarians in the eyes of medical students?
That's such a great question. And this also came up in the focus groups. I think at least one of the focus group members said that they spent hours writing formative feedback on things. And they had found one student who just did something that was completely irrelevant even to the assignment. And they asked the student later, what was that about? And they said, oh, I just didn't think this was a serious assignment. And I think that's often the case. So getting to feedback credibility, I think, is difficult. And in situations where I've seen it work really well, it's when the librarians are fully embedded and seen as a part of the clinical and educational team, and then they're taken seriously as part of the whole context. So instead of just saying, okay, the library's here to do this, goodbye. Being a part of the class and having that be a shared experience can go a long way.
So take me into the anatomy of that class, because just you're saying it in general terms. What is the anatomy of that education?
Sure. So even at NYU, one of my librarians currently, the way that she teaches, it's actually not at the same time, not in the same room at the same time, but she coordinates her class with a physician who does the epidemiology and biostats content, and she does a related critical appraisal and information seeking class. So they do that for each one of the study designs across 6 months, and they each assess and provide feedback on medical student abilities. And I think our medical students have taken that quite a bit more seriously than even when I was doing the same thing 5 years ago. The partnership that she's been able to develop now, med students really, really do take it much more seriously, and they see her as a part of the whole process, not just like dropping in, dropping out, goodbye. So it's really integrated. And unfortunately, like the past couple years, her assessments we've just had in the library because we didn't know where to put them. But this year she's reached out, and so they're going to be integrated into the medical students' portfolios for the pre-clerkship year. And then hopefully when these students graduate and go through Night on Call, we'll also be able to see like from the beginning of their pre-clerkship year to the end to what happens in an OSCE. So we'll also have a bit of longitudinal data about these students' performance.
Looking forward to seeing that. I give the word back to the pro-rector.
Thank you, Dr. Stalmeyer. The sixth and last opponent is Dr. Emmeline Brouwer. She is assistant professor at the Department of Educational Development and Research, and she is director of She Collaborates. Dr. Brouwer.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I also wish you and your team congratulations on your thesis. Our both PhD journeys started in the fall of 2015 together with also your paronyms. And you surely built my evidence-based research capacity around reference managers at the time. It turns out that I also reviewed your initial PhD proposal as one of the assignments in the context of that course. So I looked back in my files a bit, and luckily I found that pretty much all of my remarks from that assignment have now been addressed more than satisfactorily in this body of work. Interestingly, there is one area of inquiry that I signaled back then that still puzzles me now. The OSCE assignment that guided your work, as you explained in your presentation, dealt with an acute patient with a new onset hypertension and a headache. In Chapter 5, you present students' perspectives on this simulation scenario-based assessment. And some of your interviewees, and I can recognize that from my own clinical practice, indicated that in an actual clinical setting, if this situation would happen, they would approach the scenario rather differently. Can you explain why you chose this scenario as a typical case scenario for EBM? And based on the Chapter 5 findings, can you reflect on how authentic the scenario is?
Esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. Yes, I can tell you, so we chose this one because this was the OSCE that was built, and we said, let's just try it. Let's see if this works. Is this something that we can do? And so we rolled it out with this patient with urgent hypertension, and it is interesting. We also asked the students to come up with, they have to also identify what's the important question to ask. Some of them ask, has this patient had too much caffeine today? Some of them ask, they ask all kinds of things, like, did this patient go to the bathroom enough? Like, there are some far-off things where they don't always get to what's the safest treatment for urgent hypertension in this scenario. I don't necessarily think it's the best thing ever, but I don't think in these simulated contexts you're always going to get the best thing ever. And I think that this is tricky for a number of reasons. I do think that hospitals have guidelines for how to treat urgent hypertension, so they might more naturally go to the hospital guideline and say okay, what's the guideline? I'll just do whatever that is. So it might be a tricky case in that context. But I still think it's something they should know how to get around a tricky case. Even if it's something that they would have to follow a guideline for, they should still be able to find the evidence behind that. And in an ideal world for me, this is a great test case. We can see that this is a thing that we can do and we can describe it. But we also are going to, in the future, need to have a range of cases we're going to need to have ones that are fairly easy gimme kinds of cases so that they can maybe practice a little bit more. And we're going to have ones that are a little bit more complex, where they're going to have to do a little bit of a deeper dig to find actually the information they need, or a context where it's kind of difficult to find the answers, like with what's the best probiotic to use in a kid who has an ear infection and so they're on antibiotics. Like that's a really tricky question to search for evidence for, often because the search terms you'd use are so varied. Like you can't really use probiotic. You have to know which of the ones you're looking for in order to search for it. So I think that ultimately we are going to have a range, and this for me is just a test case that we can begin to develop more from.
Thank you. That indeed answered my next question also about different types of cases that you could use. And then to follow up and related, you conclude, as was mentioned, I think that the success rate using these point-of-care tools was nearly perfect in this particular acute scenario. In the more complex or more less common or more tricky scenarios that you already mentioned, what would be the most reliable resources that you want students to find and assess? And what does that imply then for further teaching and assessment? And is then a time-bound OSCE still the most applicable format, or what other approach would you suggest?
That's a really great question, and it really depends on the field. So like UpToDate, which is the biggest point-of-care tool that's the most widely used, does have some gaps. Orthopedic surgery, for instance, it's okay with OBGYN, but not the most in-depth. Genetics, it's not the best in kind of high-level overviews. So what sources would I think about in future for those different kinds of cases? I think that those are things that I would think about more in residency, and would be things like we do actually do an OSCE with our OBGYN program, and in that one we have the students mostly use PubMed, sometimes Google Scholar, but mostly they're going to original work rather than synthesized evidence, just because of the nature of the field is too current that it's not going to be best covered in a synthesized resource like a point-of-care tool. So like in general PubMed, but I think that's going to rapidly change. Like it's been PubMed as the best source since, maybe 2002. But as we go into generative AI land, tools like Perplexity or ResearchRabbit or Scite.ai are going to have a big impact on synthesis of original studies. There's not a lot of tools that can include the full text yet, but they, give it another year or two. So I think right now I would say PubMed. That's not going to be the same in a year.
Mr. Nicholson, as you have noticed, the time for defending your thesis has passed. The committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and in particular the quality of your defense. And please await our return.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Mr. Nicholson, the committee present here and also present online has assessed the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And in view of his positive verdict, they have decided to grant you the degree of doctor. We have also looked at the previous qualifications, and altogether we come to this decision. Professor De Bruin is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom and law. And I invite now your supervisor to take the floor. Professor De Bruin.
All right,
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Joseph Nicholson, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Close by, please come. Perfect. Thank you. Please be seated.
Dr. Nicholson. This is my very first of these laudatio. Thank you. A few weeks ago, anticipating that I would need to craft this statement, I sent the following email to a selected list of our colleagues. Dear friends of Joey Nicholson, as you all know, Joey is about to defend his PhD dissertation. After having the privilege of being on his supervisory committee for years, I am so excited that I'll be able to attend this ceremony in person. Professor Kees van der Vleuten has asked me to speak for the committee about you. Apparently, they're hoping for personal anecdotes and reflections. Here's where I need your help. From my own experience, I can easily speak to Joey's intelligence and love of learning. I can attest to his persistence, willingness to ask thorny questions, his eagerness to learn new methods and embrace new theories with gusto. I can describe his rapidly evolving administrative chops and deepening leadership skills as he led the series of studies that made up this body of work. I will testify as to how, because of these characteristics and in collaboration with many others, he has broken new ground and done important work that elevated his own professional contribution and that of his peers. I'm prepared to demonstrate his significant impact on medical education at one institution, the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and on a national and international level. I have to read this. I can confirm that Joey Nicholson has courageously faced many personal and professional challenges, with both a sense of duty and humor in equal measure. For instance, when in 2020, with the unexpected premature death of our friend and colleague, Jeff Williams, and without much preparation, Joey stepped in to become the director of the NYU Health Sciences Library, a position he held with distinction ever since. I can say all that, but I would love to add a few personal anecdotes that illustrate why Joey has so many devoted friends. Can each of you reply to this email with a story or a reflection to be included in my comments? I will be sharing them publicly, so keep it clean. Thanks all. And then I waited a few days and nothing happened. I was about to send a reminder when I received a flood of rather long emails with many attachments, links, and embedded photos, which I will not be showing. But first, a brief bio, which Joey provided to me. Joey's family moved from Clarksburg, West Virginia, to California when he was 8 years old. giving him an interesting childhood experience of growing up in a very cross-cultural way between Appalachia and the San Francisco Bay Area. For those of you who know the United States of America, that's a particular contrast. He began hanging out in medical libraries when he turned 12. As he said earlier, his mother got a job as a librarian at the Veterans Hospital Administration Hospital, and school breaks were spent photocopying tables of contents, checking in journals, typing out catalog cards. In this way, from an early age, he came to see how impactful and fun it could be to help people with their information needs. He studied linguistics, French, which I did not know, at the University of California, Davis, received his first master's degree in library and information science from the University of Pittsburgh's, their School of Information Science, and his second in public health, which I did know, from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. When in 2005, he joined the Touro University as an academic medical librarian, he discovered his professional mission was to improve education for library users and increase collaboration among librarians and their academic counterparts. This path brought all of us to this moment, and we are all better for it. In 2020, Joey Nicholson was awarded the Estelle Brotman Award for Academic Health Sciences Librarian of the Year from the Medical Library Association. That's the academic pedigree. However, Joey's soul was nurtured by caring for others. He has a loving biological family who are with us today, his sister, brother-in-law, and his mother and his father, and he has a large and loving chosen family in New York City and all over, from what I understand. One of his particularly close chosen family members, Dr. Kate Schwartz, told me that her first date with Joey lasted from brunch through after-dinner drinks and involved walking most of San Francisco and ended with Joey saying to her, "This would be the best first day ever if you liked men and I liked women." Within 2 weeks, it was as if they had known each other since childhood. And when they both relocated to New York City, they spent Saturdays on random walking tours, covering the entire island of Manhattan in 6 weeks. There's more. When Kate became a single mom, Joey became an exemplary surrogate dad and sent Kate's mother more photos of baby Rhea than Kate did. Anyone who knows Joey or follows him on social media is aware that when he isn't busy running the library, he strives to see as many Tony Award eligible Broadway shows as possible each year. Kate will be forever grateful to Joey for ensuring that she too, even though she had a baby at home, was able to share because he took over the babysitting and garnering tickets so that they could watch the Tony Award show together. Kate's especially grateful to Joey for how devoted he is to Rhea. He's never let his work or this dissertation interfere with being in her life in meaningful ways, including important daily events like picking her up at school, attending to naps, preparing meals for the family, and ensuring there is a college savings account for her education. That made me cry when I read that. Joey bakes. Does everybody know that? He bakes so often and so creatively that Rhea excitedly requests Joey bread for breakfast before even getting out of bed. And I have seen pictures, which I will not share, of some of the most amazing birthday cakes he has made to Rhea's specifications, no matter how random. When she turned 4, he spent 15 hours crafting a strawberry unicorn cake that looked like a live flower. Like any loving parent, Joey has put aside his natural aversions to things like camping in the great outdoors with Rhea and her friends. Oh, and she also claims he gives the best hugs, which I do know. Speaking of photos, which testify to his great generosity of spirit for his friends, there's one from Costa Rica of Joey with his signature smile, if you see it there, on his face, and a real live monkey on his head. Apparently, after a mangrove tour, this snapshot was taken. His friend Beck exclaimed, "Well, that was unexpected. Good thing none of us are scared of monkeys," to which Joey just raised his hand and revealed that the truth was it was a frozen terror-tinged smile on his face, because he is afraid of monkeys. Our colleague, Dr. Abigail Winkle, reflected that knowing Joey Nicholson has broken every one of her stereotypes about librarians, and I really do apologize, but this is her quote. "He's the most unboring, warm, funny, and fun colleague imaginable," she said. "It's a good thing that so much of the library is online, because Joey is so much fun to talk to, that he'd be getting shushed all the time by librarians that I have met before him."
It's happened.
Yes. After spending time at a piano bar with Joey and medical librarian friends while at a professional meeting, Abby learned that his encyclopedic knowledge extends to show tunes and food. Abby also noticed a sentiment that's echoed by many other, how insightful, hardworking, and collaborative you are. This is reiterated by Doctors Colleen Gillespie and her wife, Elisa Serkis, who added how positive a presence you are, always seeking to support and promote the success of others and always tackling problems and issues from a positive framework. In time of crisis and difficulty, Joey created a safe and secure environment within the NYU Health Sciences Library, a place where all members of the library were appreciated, valued, and in turn could feel completely confident in placing their trust in you as a leader. Joey is deeply appreciated as a mentor. Jeffrey Wilhite, a PhD candidate, notes, what a great sounding board you are and a motivator for him and many, many, many junior folks who are in your aura. Joey, finally, from your PhD supervisors, Anik, Case, and myself, I have the pleasure of saying that we have deeply enjoyed the journey. I want to get the words right, so I'm going to read them. It's been 7 years, am I right?
I lost track.
Something like that, okay. Despite the physical distance and distancing required by the ensuing pandemic, a few other very significant and personal challenges, Anik is especially impressed with your strong professional identity. She notes, Joey lives and breathes being a librarian. You're committed to doing whatever you do, whether it's mastering optimal foraging theory, submitting or resubmitting manuscripts, completing the PhD, or baking a chocolate dragon in a swimming pool cake for a little person precisely and with rigor, all the while being modest, at times perhaps too modest. We are going to miss working so consistently and closely with you, and we are extremely proud to have been with you on this journey. Congratulations.
Esteemed Dr. Nicholson, dear Joey, it's my great pleasure to congratulate you with your doctorate, and I congratulate you also on behalf of Maastricht University. And I would like to share some impressions of the committee with you. We have read your thesis with pleasure and interest, and it was a very well-written thesis. It's also of a good quality. Already 4 papers have been published. And we think that the study and the results of it will have impact and influence the field of providing scientific information, and in particular on librarians. And I think there you are addressing a gap. In your defense, we saw that you are a good debater and a good communicator. And we have seen that you are really passionate and also honest. And we enjoyed your enthusiasm and your motivation. We are very satisfied with your defense. And I do not only congratulate you with that, but also your 3 supervisors, Professor De Bruin, Professor van der Vleuten and Dr. Calette. You may be proud on the results that we have seen today. I think also of quite a long time of guiding and working together, and indeed, being partners also in the development of Dr. Nicholson. Congratulations with that. I would also like to include my congratulations, your family, in particular your parents. And we had no single difficulty in recognizing the most enthusiastic person in the audience, and I think that's your mother. I also congratulate other members of the family and your former colleagues, your friends, and all people that have attributed to your studies and to your thesis. I would like to thank all the members of both the assessment committee and of this degree committee. Thank you very much for critically reading the manuscript and having an interesting academic discussion. Thank you for that. And in particular, I would like to thank the external members of the committee, and 2 of them are online. And before I close this academic ceremony, I would like to invite them to congratulate you. I would like to start with asking Professor Shannon Jones to open.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to even participate in the process. Dr. Nicholson, I'm still going to call you Joey sometimes. I'm still going to call you Ryan sometimes. But most importantly, I want to call you Dr. Nicholson. I'm so proud of you for staying the course, because I know this was a hard process, a hard journey, but you did it. I'm happy for you. I'm also just want to thank you for all of the health sciences librarians across the country who endeavor to go through this process, who endeavor to teach in the health sciences. I think you've done a really good job of showing them that it is all possible. And I just look forward to what you're going to do in the future and just the impact that you're going to have on our discipline as a whole. So congratulations, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do in 2024.
Thank you, Professor Jones. Dr. Emily Vordell, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Congratulations, Dr. Nicholson. What a pleasure it's been to see you just shine today. Your work is so important. As Dr. Jones said, such potential for impact. We've already seen impact, and it will just continue. So I look forward to continuing to see you contribute to the field. I really want to commend you for your publications being in such interdisciplinary and diverse outlets. You're getting this message across to a variety of audiences, which is commendable. And I just want to wish you joy as you update your LinkedIn profile and your email signature and everything with the PhD. You've earned it, and I hope you and your family enjoy celebrating. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Before I close the ceremony, I would like to indicate that we will take a picture here in the aula with you in the middle, and also with the 2 online opponents still on the screen here. And after that, we will take a second picture in the stairs in the hall. After that, I invite you to come to the reception in the rafter of this building. Hereby, I close this academic ceremony.
Recording stopped.